Cora Bell nearly stepped on the dead man before dawn. He lay across the threshold of her smithy with one boot in the dust and one heel hooked against the warped plank, as if he had meant to knock and lost the strength for it in the last inch. Frost silvered the brim of his hat. His coat was dark with creek water and something thicker at the shoulder. The only sound in the whole sleeping town was the banked breath of her forge from the night before and the faint iron clink of the chain sign turning in the cold. She set down her coal scuttle, crouched, and pressed 2 fingers to his throat because lonely people learned quickly that nobody else was coming. There it was. One thin, stubborn beat. She caught him under the arms and dragged him inside over the packed dirt floor, boots groaning, shoulders burning. When she kicked the door shut and turned, the first blade of sunrise had come through the east crack of the wall. It threw a sharp stripe across the anvil, the water barrel, the shovel, her skirt, her hands. The stranger cast nothing at all. His face was ash-pale under a week's worth of beard. There was a bullet crease high along his shoulder, not fresh enough to be pouring, but fresh enough to have stiffened his shirt. Cora cut the cloth away with her farrier knife, washed it clean, packed it with cobweb and whiskey, and tied it off tight. He never once cried out. When his eyes opened, they were a strange clear gray. The kind creek water went just before ice took it. "Don't send for the doctor," he whispered. Cora sat back on her heels. "Mister, if you can order me about, you can tell me your name." He looked past her toward the forge, toward the black mouth of it waiting for fire. "Need a gun made by Sunday." That was all. "Before we go further, settle in where you are tonight. If you've got this story on while supper's on the stove, or while your hands are busy with mending, let us know in the comments where you're listening from. It does a lonely tale good to know whose company it's keeping." Cora rose slowly. Folks in San Rafael came to her for wagon tires, hinges, branding irons, coffin nails, stove plates, and once in a while a bit of horseshoe work when they couldn't bully the regular smith into staying sober. They did not come before sunrise bleeding through their shirts and asking for firearms like men ordering bread. "You're in no state to hold a cup, let alone a pistol," she said. "Not for me." His mouth moved like the thought pained him more than the wound. "For the one left behind." He let his head roll toward her then, and there was something in his face that made the nape of her neck go cold. Not because she knew him, because she almost did. By full morning he was gone. No hoof tracks. No sign but the bloody rag on her floor and 3 old silver dollars on the bench. By the time Mrs. Lawton opened the boarding house and Ned Pruitt raised his shutters, Cora knew 2 things. Somebody had watched her door before dawn, and the whole town would know before supper. By noon the rumor had arrived before truth ever could. Silas Pike sent for a plowshare and came himself to fetch it. He entered like he owned the smoke in the rafters. Tall, clean-collared, gold chain bright across his vest, Silas Pike had the freight yard, the cattle contracts, and most likely the sheriff. 3 years earlier he had stood beneath the cottonwood, while Cora's husband swung for a robbery he had not done. Cora still heard the rope creak some nights when the wind turned. Pike set one gloved finger on the finished plowshare. "You work too hard for a widow, Mrs. Bell. Metal doesn't mind my company." He smiled without warmth. "I hear you had a caller before dawn." She did not blink. "I hear you pay too much mind to streets that ain't yours." That pleased him. "Sell me the forge. The rail survey will want this strip soon enough. I'd pay you to go east somewhere quieter." Somewhere quieter. As if quiet had not been all she'd had since Amos died. "Not for sale. Everything is." His gaze touched the 3 silver dollars and sharpened. "If that caller returns, I'd advise better company. Ghosts make poor customers." When he had gone, Cora stood very still. That evening, just after the church bell struck 7, the stranger came back. Not through the door. He was simply there beside the quench barrel when she turned from the forge, hat in hand, the fresh fire painting his cheekbones copper and his boots no more dusty than before. Still no shadow. Not in firelight. Not in lamplight, not anywhere her eye could catch. Cora set the tongs down carefully. "I buried one husband already. I won't start taking orders from the other side of the veil." His mouth twitched, almost a smile. "Fair enough. My name is Daniel Mercer." The tongs slipped from her fingers and rang on the floor. She knew the name. Deputy Daniel Mercer had vanished with the county tax ledger after saying too loudly that Pike's numbers did not square with widows losing land. Pike paid for the grave marker himself, though nobody had ever found a body. Cora's voice came out thin. "You're dead. Near enough to inconvenience me." He laid a folded paper on the bench between them. Your husband didn't rob that stage. Amos hid this before they got him. Inside was a list of names she knew: widows, small ranchers, a seamstress with 3 girls. Beside each name sat a tax amount, and beside that, in another hand, a larger amount marked collected. Collected twice. Cora looked up. The forge popped behind her. Why bring it to me? Because Pike thinks grief made you harmless. Daniel glanced at Amos's hammer hanging on the wall. And because men like him never understand what listening can do. He wanted a Colt-pattern revolver, short-barreled and balanced true, with walnut grips and Cora's crossed nail and horseshoe mark hidden under the frame. Who's it for? She asked. Daniel looked toward the open street, toward twilight settling like smoke. My brother. If he's found his way here. As if summoned by the word, hoofbeats sounded outside. The rider who dismounted moved like a man made half of old war and half of stubbornness. Broad-shouldered, coat worn white at the seams, one scar-dragged hand near the pommel, he stopped dead at the sight of the forged sign. Bell Iron Repair. His jaw worked once. Mrs. Bell. Cora wiped her hands on her apron. Depends who wants her. Eli Mercer. The name landed heavy. I'm looking for my brother. Behind him, the quench barrel reflected firelight and empty air. Daniel was gone. That was the moment Cora understood her life had tipped past any edge she could walk back from. Eli Mercer carried Daniel's deputy star wrapped in a red handkerchief and grief-packed so deep he wore it like bone. He had come from Abilene following rumors because he never believed Daniel had stolen a cent. Cora believed in neither, or had not until dawn. She did not show him the list at once. She gave him coffee and let him sit by the forge while night settled, because suspicion was easier than trust, and both of them had lived on easy rations too long. My brother wrote about your husband once, he said at last. Cora kept drawing the file along a wagon latch so she would not have to look at him. Did he? Daniel wrote once that Amos Bell was the only man in this town who knew a short count from a lie and wasn't afraid to say so. Then I got a telegram saying he'd disgraced the badge. Never sounded like him. Because it wasn't. She handed him the folded page. He read it once, then again slower, his thumb pressing so hard into the paper it trembled. When he finished, he closed his eyes. Pike. And Daniel brought you this? It was the first real test. She could lie and keep her footing on ordinary ground. Or she could step clean into madness with a stranger whose hurt matched hers enough to be dangerous. Yes, she said. Eli opened his eyes. No ridicule. No easy doubt. Just a sorrow so worn it had gone past surprise. Then he's dead for certain. He only ever came to me when there was work needing done. That pulled the corner of her mouth before she could stop it. The expression startled them both. For 2 days the forge worked with purpose. Eli repaired the flue. Cora heated, hammered, drilled, and filed. Daniel came only at dusk, speaking little. Once he told her to shave an ounce from the barrel because Eli always shot low when he was angry. Another time he asked her to notch one chamber. When she asked why, he said, so a man remembers there is always one choice he cannot take back. On Friday, Silas Pike returned with Sheriff Boone and half a smile. Boone was thick through the middle, his badge polished brighter than his conscience. Got word an armed drifter's staying here, Boone said. Town's uneasy. Eli leaned against the post, saying nothing. Quiet sat on him like a better weapon than any gun. Pike's gaze roved over the forge and stopped on the walnut grips. You should be careful what you build, Mrs. Bell. Some things don't stay in the hand you made them for. Cora held his eyes. Same could be said for lies. Boone flinched. Pike only smiled. Noon tomorrow the tax sale, notices go up. Be a pity if men with questions were still in town. After they left, Cora found her hands shaking over the file. Eli stepped beside her without touching. You can take his money, he said. Sell out. Ride anywhere you please. Nobody would call it cowardice. Would you? He took a long breath. No, but I'd understand it. She set the file down. He took my husband because Amos would not stay quiet while widows were robbed. If I leave now, I help him hang that same man twice. Eli's stare dropped to the half-shaped revolver frame. A thing ain't ruined just because the fire changed its shape. The words settled between them with more weight than either voice had given them. Near midnight, Daniel returned with a new instruction. Go to the old assay office behind Pike's warehouse. Look under the scale pit. They went by the alleys to the old assay office behind Pike's warehouse. Under the rusted scale pit, they found a tin deed box stuffed with stamped notices, quitclaim papers signed with marks from people who could not write, and the county embossing die with a tiny chip missing from the RN territory. Enough to hang a better man than Pike. On the walk back, with the box wrapped in a feed sack between them, Cora felt the whole town listening through its windows. If you had been standing there with truth in your hands and danger on every side, what would you have done? Trusted the stranger, the dead man, or no one at all? Tell me below, because choices like that measure a life. They had nearly reached the forge when a bottle shattered against the door. Oil ran down the planks. Flame climbed after it. Down, Eli barked. Gunfire cracked from the alley mouth. The first shot blew splinters from the hitching rail. The second punched through the window. She hit the dirt behind the trough as Eli fired back twice, quick and flat. Her whole shop, the only place that still held Amos in the grain of its tools, had started to burn. She ran anyway. Eli covered her while she hurled the quench bucket at the flames. Steam burst up. Another shot tore the bucket from her hand. Daniel. He pointed not to the street, but to the coal chute at the rear of the forge, the narrow crawl Amos had dug years before. Cora snatched the unfinished revolver, the deed box, and Amos's hammer. Eli backed toward her one shot at a time. A man rushed the doorway. Eli felled him. Another lunged through smoke, and Cora broke his wrist with Amos's hammer. They dropped through the rear chute into coal dust and darkness, just as the front windows burst inward. The crawl was tight as a grave. Heat pressed through the boards overhead. Ahead, Daniel's pale coat moved through the dark like winter refusing to melt. He led them under the stable wall and out into the arroyo beyond town. From the ridge they looked back. The forge roof glowed red. Pike's hired men swarmed the yard. In the middle of them stood Silas Pike, hat on, hands clasped behind him, watching her life burn. Then Eli made a rough sound low in his throat. Down by the cottonwood, half hidden in the firelight, Boone's deputies were hauling a body upright beneath a rope. Mrs. Lawton's grandson Toby, 16, stable boy. He had carried messages for Cora all winter when the roads were mud. A placard hung from his neck. Ledgers by sunup. Cora felt the world narrow to one clear, hateful line. They took shelter before dawn in an abandoned charcoal burner's hut in the Pinyon Hills. Eli's arm was grazed, not deep but ugly enough. Cora boiled snow melt, cleaned it, and stitched the tear while he sat bare-shouldered and silent. When she tied the last knot, he looked at her with a kind of tired honesty that had no room for performance. I left Daniel here alone, he said. He wrote asking me to come down months before he vanished. I took a cattle contract instead. Thought there'd be time after the drive. Men make a religion out of later, then act shocked when later runs out. Cora set the needle aside. Amos begged me not to speak Pike's name till he had proof enough to survive it. The morning they hanged him, I still kept quiet because Pike threatened Toby and the Lawton girls. Been hating that silence ever since. Eli folded the bloodied cloth in his hands. Lonely ain't the same as empty, he said. It only means nobody stayed long enough to hear the rest of you. That was the first time she cried for Amos without trying not to. Not hard. Just a quiet spilling, as if something in her had thawed one careful inch. Eli did not hush it. He only stayed. Later, when the gray noon leaned against the window hole, Cora showed him the nearly finished gun. The steel gleamed soft where she'd stoned it smooth. The walnut grips were plain, warm, honest wood. Feels wrong, she said, turning it in her palm. After all this, making one more thing to kill a man with. Eli weighed the revolver. Your forge made plows and coffin nails. Doesn't mean the fire had a favorite. This one feels like truth. They sat close because the cold insisted on it, and because both had spent too many years pretending they needed no one. Cora gave him Amos's red neckerchief for his arm. Eli gave her Daniel's dented star. She ran her thumb over it. He kept coming back. He was stubborn. Eli's mouth softened. Family trait. When he kissed her, it was slow and wondering, like a man testing whether a door he had no right to want might open because she wanted it open too. The grief in both of them did not leave. It simply made room. If this part catches somewhere tender in you tonight, you are exactly who it was written for. A like and a subscribe tell us to keep making room for stories where broken hearts are not the end of anybody. At dusk, Daniel appeared in the doorway of the hut, pale as frost, rain scent clinging to him, though the sky was clear. He looked from Cora to Eli, and the weariness in him eased for the first time. Toby's alive, he said. For now, Pike wants the papers at the tax sale. Public fear buys better than private threats. Then that's where we ended, Cora said. Daniel nodded. Under the platform is the strongbox with every deed he stole. The key stays on his watch chain. He'll draw with his right hand and step left when cornered. He always thinks his left side is luckier. He looked at the revolver in Eli's grip. That gun isn't yours, brother. Eli glanced at Cora and understood. Before dawn she finished the piece, filed the front sight hair fine, stamped the crossed nail and horseshoe under the frame, and holstered it at her own hip. For the first time in 3 years, she felt something steadier than rage. Sunday's tax sale drew half of San Rafael into the square because cruelty always drew a crowd when dressed as law. Pike stood on the church platform with Boone beside him and Toby bound near the bell post. Widows clutched shawls over their throats. Men who owed Pike money kept their eyes on the dust. Cora came straight up the center street with Soot still in her cuffs, and Eli half a step behind. Murmurs followed. Some folks had thought her dead in the forge. Boone went pale enough to show every broken vein in his nose. Mrs. Bell, Pike called mildly. I had hoped grief had taught you prudence. It taught me arithmetic, she said. Her voice carried because Smiths learned young to speak over hammers. You robbed this town twice. Once in money, once in fear. She appended the feed sack onto the platform. Forged notices. Fraudulent deeds. The county die. Gasps moved through the crowd. Ned Pruitt choked out that his sister's name was on one of the papers. Mrs. Lawton went white and then red. Pike laughed softly. Any thief can steal paper. Doesn't make it true. Cora lifted the die. This chip in the yard does. She showed the broken serif on the false deeds, then pressed the die into a lump of wax from the clerk's table. The same wound printed clear. You had my husband killed because he knew it. You had Daniel Mercer killed because he found where you hid them. All eyes turned to Boone. The sheriff swallowed. Sweat shone at his temple. Now hold on. Tell them where you buried the ledger, Eli said. His voice so quiet folks leaned in to hear. Boone broke first. I didn't kill nobody, he blurted. Pike said it was only scare talk. Said Mercer wouldn't hush. Said Bell had to hang so the others would sign. The square seemed to stop breathing. Pike moved then, all velvet gone. He yanked Toby upright by the collar and dragged a pistol from under the auction table, barrel jammed to the boy's head. Back, he snapped. All of you. Toby whimpered once. Mrs. Lawton made a sound like an animal losing blood. Cora did not draw yet. She looked at Pike the way she looked at bad metal, without fear and without kindness either. You always did think fear was the same as power, and you always were just a smith's wife. No, she said. That was the part you misunderstood. Her hand moved. The revolver cleared leather smooth as a prayer leaving the body. She shot the bell rope cleat beside Toby's shoulder. The bell dropped with a thunderclap. Pike flinched, Toby tore free, and Eli hit the platform from the side. Pike's shot went wild. Pike staggered back, clawing for balance, and his watch chain snapped on the podium edge. The strongbox key flashed in the sun and fell through the slats beneath the platform. Cora vaulted the steps, went to one knee, and fired into the lock plate under the platform where Pike kept his strongbox chained. Her own handiwork answered true. The box burst open in the dust, deeds and ledgers spilling out for the whole town to see. There was Pike's ruin, shining in daylight. Widows surged first, then ranchers, then men who had looked away too long and found they could not bear the taste of themselves another minute. Boone tried to run. Old Reverend Sykes cracked his cane into Boone's shin and sat him down hard. Pike smashed Eli in the face with the pistol butt and bolted for the freight wagon. Cora chased. He snatched the shotgun from its bracket and turned as she came level. For an instant everything narrowed. Blue sky, wagon wheel, Pike's breath sawing, the hot certainty of steel in her grip. He sneered through blood. You won't do it. Cora thought of Amos under the cottonwood. Daniel without a grave. Toby on his knees. Every widow counting coins twice because one rich man had decided grief made them easy. Then she thought of the woman she had been all winter, speaking only to metal because words felt too costly. She fired. The round took Pike high in the chest and threw him back against his wagon. He slid down the wheel, hands open, eyes wider than any look he'd worn in life. When he tried to speak, blood answered first, then one thin thread of voice. Mine, he said, staring not at Cora but at the deeds all over the dust. Was all mine. Not anymore, she said. He died there with the whole town watching him lose everything he had built out of other people's fear. By afternoon, Boone had signed a full confession. The territorial judge in Santa Fe received the ledger, the die, the false deeds, and 6 sworn statements before sunset. Toby was home in his grandmother's bed. The sale was voided. Pike's accounts were frozen. Freight contracts passed to men who had actually done the hauling, and widows got back the land they had mourned as lost. As for the forge, half the roof was ash and half the walls stood blackened. But a forge is not a church bell. It can be remade with fire. That night, with stars hard above the black line of hills, Cora and Eli stood among the ruins with Daniel between them. He looked lighter, as if the wound in him had finally loosened. Eli tried once to speak and failed. Daniel spared him the labor. "You came," he said. "Too late." "No." Daniel's gaze shifted to Cora, gentle and level. "Right when you were meant to." Cora stepped closer. "I never thank you for Amos. For bringing him back honest." A faint smile touched Daniel's mouth. "He was honest before I got here. You were just the one brave enough to keep it warm till morning." The church bell rang once in the distance, though no hand pulled it. When Cora looked back, Daniel Mercer was gone. In the weeks that followed, San Rafael learned the awkward grace of treating Cora Bell like a woman they should have honored all along. Men brought lumber instead of pity. Widows hauled brick in aprons. Eli rebuilt the flue and stayed on, because leaving no longer felt like duty. By first frost there was laughter in the yard again. Toby sweeping crooked, Mrs. Lawton criticizing everyone while feeding twice as many as she claimed, Eli planing walnut grips at the bench Cora had once kept only for ghosts. Strange how the heart can live so long shuttered and still know what to do the minute someone opens a window. 1 year later, on a clean October evening, Cora set a finished horseshoe on the rack while Eli came in carrying their daughter half asleep against his shoulder, the child smelling of dust, milk, and sun. He laid the little girl in the basket by the forge and crossed back to her. Outside, the rebuilt bell tower took the last light of day, and inside the new iron glowed soft as a promise finally kept. Next time, we'll tell the story of a deaf woman sent to a winter ranch because her own brothers called her useless, and the blind rancher who recognized her courage before he ever learned the shape of her face.